Last night I stumbled upon something terrifying. I've been living in Ohio for about 13 years now. Was 13 when we moved here. And it's been about as boring and uneventful as you'd expect rural Ohio to be. Cornfields at both ends of the street, houses spread out with plenty of land, chicken coops, horse stables, being woken up to the echoing crack of what is surely a neighbor firing off rounds at a haystack or cans and so on. It's not even a very religious area either, just a lot of wannabe country folk who live in Ohio, and one neighbor who named their son Cameron with a K so that his initials would be KKK. I wish I was kidding, but I've seen the birth certificate. Anyways, that was just to help you understand where I was living, as it makes what I witnessed 29 hours ago now feel that much more out of place. 3 a.m. on a Friday night in rural Ohio may as well be used as a filming location for zombie movies, due to how quiet and desolate everything around you feels. You may hear one car drive by in the span of a night, and none of the neighbors are very active, at least not usually. Last night, however, they had guests over in the evening around 6 p.m., and I thought absolutely nothing of it. Why would I? Certainly wasn't the first time they had company, but it was peculiar when nobody left as the hours ticked by. At midnight, when I normally went to bed, I happened to look out my bedroom window, which has a view of their lengthy driveway, and noticed that all 8 cars were still there. It wasn't necessarily strange, but they weren't mid-20s people like me who could just be drinking and laughing their asses off. The couple who lived there were probably in their late 50s or early 60s, and most of the guests that I saw were all around the same age range. I wasn't particularly tired last night, so I threw on my headphones and played Pokemon on my Switch for about 2 hours or so, basically until I started to yawn and feel tired. After turning my Switch off and putting it and my headphones away, I happened to glance out my window and once again noticed that every car was still in my neighbor's driveway. However, something was happening out there now. For starters, a few of the men circled around the trunk of a black SUV, talking amongst themselves as they were looking inside and gesturing to something. I didn't have any thoughts about the matter yet, but then one of them suddenly cocked back and threw a fist into the trunk. I couldn't see who or what was punched, but moments later I saw 2 of them drag a large black duffel bag out of the trunk, and they slowly carried it inside. This is when my stomach began to twist into knots. In hindsight, I should have just continued being the oblivious individual I was and turned away to go to bed, but I found myself drawn to whatever they were doing. Was I witnessing a crime in real time? Was I getting too invested in a bunch of old people hanging out on a Friday night when I was home alone? Who could say, really? For the next half hour, my eyes peeked through the shut blinds of my window, just watching neighbor's house intently. I saw a few shadows moving past the windows of lit rooms, but beyond that, there wasn't much exciting or intriguing. I then saw the backyard become illuminated by those cheap tiki torches you can buy at Home Depot, being lit by 2 of the women who came outside. They were lighting the torches in a circle. If I had to guess, a circle about 9 feet in diameter, but it was hard to know for sure from above 60 yards away. The rest of the crowd inside the house slowly began to fill the backyard, and I noticed something that made my skin crawl. They were all wearing white robes. They looked thin like lace or silk, rather than thick and plush like bathrobes or something more regal. This all felt way too weird for me, and the little voice in the back of my head that's way smarter than I am was telling me to just stop being curious and go to bed. But curiosity was calling to me like the Green Goblin mask, and I couldn't pull my eyes away from their yard. Soon they all stood in a circle amidst the tiki torches, each person standing in between 2 of them, holding hands in that circle. They all looked down towards the ground, but at the time I couldn't see what they were looking at or what they were saying. I was never good at reading lips, so in my infinite wisdom, I threw on a jacket and my shoes, ignoring the fact that I was still wearing shorts, and as quietly as I could, I slipped out my backyard door. I was very thankful for the fact that we never bought one of those motion sensor lights for the backyard, only the front door. I carefully scanned the ground around me as I approached a wide row of bushes that my mom liked to keep trimmed in the yard. It was almost a perfect divide between our property and theirs, and it allowed for me to hide behind them, yet still see through enough at my neighbors. I wasn't yet close enough to hear exactly what they were saying. I could only really hear the mumbling sounds of words, but it became evident they were chanting something in near-perfect unison with one another, all while their eyes remained looking downward into what I could now see with a large hole. The chanting went on for what felt like an eternity, but in reality was maybe close to 10 minutes. That's still a lot of time to be chanting, but on a cold night where you're at least partially terrified of what you're witnessing, even a few seconds feels like a painstaking eternity. What followed the chanting is something that makes me wish I had just called the police last night or even this morning. As the chanting died down, the group began to hum in unison as 2 of the men went back into the house, the same 2 men who carried the duffel bag inside from the car. They exited the house a couple minutes later carrying that same duffel bag, then dropping it to their feet with a hefty thud right before the hole. One of them bent over and unzipped it. Then they both hoisted the bag into the air, turned it over, and watched with such a grotesque lack of care on their faces as the body of a young woman toppled out and landed in the hole with another impactful thud. I couldn't tell much about the woman, but she didn't look to be more than a couple years within my age. She had blonde hair and for some reason was only wearing black underwear as they threw her into the hole. Was she alive? I had no idea at the time. When I get nervous, I tend to chew on the side of my gums in my mouth, and as I watched all of this unfold, my molars were practically about to chew through the flesh of my inner mouth, nearly breaking skin and causing me to bleed. Fear hit me with the weight of a car at that very moment. The fact that I was witnessing this, and they were so casually doing this on our little street. I was struggling to breathe. I didn't want to watch anymore. I just couldn't. I remained crouched as I slowly began to creep back in the direction of my back door, keeping my eyes in the direction of my neighbors, just in case one of them happened to be looking around and accidentally saw me. At least I would know it. My path back to the door was a bit off from the one I took to the bushes originally, and I ended up accidentally kicking over a water bucket we used to water flowers. I had no clue if they heard it or not, but I didn't want to be a deer in headlights if they did, so I threw myself onto the grass and stayed as flat as I could. It helps that I was wearing a black coat and black shorts. I prayed to whatever god or deity could hear me that I wouldn't be seen, and I laid there for several minutes. I didn't move an inch. I barely took breaths, just to reduce the likelihood that they may see me. When I finally, slowly looked up, they were gone from the backyard, and I let up the heaviest, softest sigh you can imagine. I looked around for a moment, just to make sure they weren't circling me or something crazy, and fortunately I saw their shadows moving around inside the house. They hadn't seen me. I was so relieved. I gently moved back to a crouching position, opened my back door slowly. It practically threw myself inside before slamming the deadbolt. That was perhaps the worst 20-ish minutes of my life. I wish I had just gone to sleep, so that I never had to witness any of this. When I got back to my bedroom, unfortunately, I was able to see the backyard from my window, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw that the tiki torches were no longer lit, but something in the yard was burning. I could see faint sparks from a fire popping up, and a growing cloud of smoke bubbled up into the air. This drained the color from my face and the life from my body. Alive or not, they set that poor woman on fire. I was horrified and drained by that point, as it was almost 5 a.m. now. I tossed my coat onto the floor and dove into bed, but I could not fall asleep. I kept zoning out and sort of daydreaming, witnessing nightmarish events where I saw the woman in that hole burning, screaming, calling my name, all as they watched me with abyssal black eyes. I laid in bed in a semi-comatose state until almost 11 a.m., when I exhaustedly dragged myself out of bed and took a shower. When I came downstairs to make the breakfast of champions, a toasted bagel with cream cheese and a stiff drink of whiskey, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. I assumed it was a text from one of my friends, or perhaps one of my parents checking on me, since I hadn't said anything to them all morning. I wish it was something that's simple and carefree. However, it was a notification from a new group chat I was a part of. Most of the numbers I didn't recognize, but I knew my parents' numbers were both in there. It was a large group text started by the neighbors next door, inviting my family and most of the houses on our street to join them for a barbecue tonight. They said they spent all night and day preparing barbacoa. I threw up in my sink immediately and have been barricaded in my bedroom ever since. I have the windows completely closed. I haven't dared to peek out at the neighbors or their barbacoa.